What is your full birth name?
Catherine Mendes.
And were you named after anyone?
My mother had an aunt named Catherine, and my middle name is because I was born near St. Patrick's Day, Patricia.
So when were you born?
March 11th, 1958.
And where were you born?
In Fresno.
When did your family immigrate to the United States?
My mother is not Portuguese. My mother's family, I have colonists on my mother's line, and they were Quakers, and they came from England. But my father's family, they are from the Azores, and my grandfather arrived in the United States on July 23rd, 1911. And he came with his widowed mother and 3 brothers. And my grandmother came in 1917. And they were from the same island and very near villages, but they did not know each other there. They met here.
Do you know why your grandparents left the Azores?
My grandfather, my dad's father, his parents had 4 sons, and shortly after the 4th was born, the father died. And so my grandfather and his brother, the 2 middle children, were sent to an orphanage in Angra. And the oldest boy and the baby stayed home with his mother. She, to provide for her family, was a midwife and a wet nurse. And the boys were at the orphanage preparing for the priesthood eventually. They were each taught a job skill. My grandfather was trained to be a tailor. They learned to read and write music, play instruments, and read and write and speak 5 languages. And then the revolution got started somewhere around 1910, and all of the religious organizations needed to shut down. And so the priest told the boys they were going to have to flee. And they went home to their mother and joined their older brother and baby brother and made arrangements to come to the United States. And she, as a widow, had her deceased husband's brother living here in Stratford, California. So he sent for them, and they came here, and she married her deceased husband's brother. So it was for security, and he was going to provide for them and take care of them.
How about your grandmother?
My grandmother, I think she was a little bit of a rebellious girl, and she saw so many people leaving La Vera Grande for America, and she decided she wanted to go. She was the only daughter, and none of her brothers had any interest in coming here, but she wanted to come. So shortly after she turned 14, she came to the United States through Rhode Island and rode a train across the country to live with her mother's brother in Sanger. She was going to be a domestic and take care of his children, help his wife with the children. And instead, the first thing they did when she got to California was they took her to a Portuguese dance, and she met a young man named Antonio, and in 6 weeks they were married.
Okay, so she came to the United States at 14 years old by herself.
Yes, by herself. I like to think I have some of her spunk, she was really something.
I can understand. So did you know your grandparents as you were growing up?
I did. I had a delightful childhood because it was just ideal. Like most Azorean immigrants, my grandfather started a dairy farm, and it was in rural Riverdale. And so my dad and his siblings all grew up on this little dairy farm. And then when my dad became an adult, my grandfather transitioned some of the authority of the dairy to his sons, And so I grew up on this ranch out in Riverdale with my madringa, my padring, and all of my cousins, and we all lived right there on the ranch. And it was just a delightful little childhood.
So you spoke a little Portuguese.
Just
What was that you said? Madringa?
madringa? Okay, you know, in Portuguese families, and I know in my family, our godmother and godfather are very important people. And we have our tios and our tias, but the word for godmother is madrina, and godfather is padrin. And I never ever referred to my godparents as anything but madringa and padring. And I always felt like I had the very best madringa and padring too. But we spent a lot of time there at the ranch with them, and they would scold me just like my own parents would scold me. And we did speak a little bit of English. However, when my grandparents came, there was this different kind of mentality that we want to be American. We want our children to fit in. They did not want their children to go to school and stand out as foreigners or outsiders, and so they encouraged them to be as American as they could be. So when I grew up, we did not speak Portuguese at home except for like baby talk, where my dad would say, okay, vamos para cama, it's time, we're going to bed, fecha a luz, abre a porta, all those little things. So I really regret I wasn't raised with the second language.
It sounds, though, like you had very close relationships, though, and that you were raised with an appreciation, certainly for the culture. Did your grandparents ever talk about, no, they didn't talk about their lives in the Azores?
Sadly, my dad was the baby of 6 children. So by the time my 2 sisters and I were born, I think they were kind of over that being grandparents thing. And we spent a lot of time with them, but it wasn't like nurturing time where they would sit us on their lap and tell us stories. You know, she taught us how to cook and help in the kitchen and things like that. But they did not speak a lot about their lives. And so I realize now what treasures I lost when they died. I say it was as if a library burned or a museum just disappeared, because they carried all of that knowledge with them. But I do have older cousins. Buddy Mendes, who's a Fresno County supervisor, he was very close to our grandparents. And so I will call him up quite often. And he was one that would always ask lots of questions. So he knows a lot about our family, and he's shared that.
So if you take out the family history and the meaning, the stories that they did not share,
right,
and you take out the fact that, you know, they wanted you to learn English, was it important to them or to your father, do you remember, that you maintain a strong sense of yourself as a Portuguese American?
I think it was just assumed we were Portuguese Americans. You know, we went to St. Anne's Church with a lot of other Portuguese people. And there was this feeling of belonging to that group of Portuguese kids. There were other Catholics also, but on Wednesdays we got out of school early to go to catechism, and that was just very, very special. And so our faith, which was a central part of our Azorean heritage, was important. And we were always involved in the festas in the summer every year. You know, we couldn't wait to find out what we were going to get to be in the festa. So it was very important, you know, a big part of our life growing up.
So as you got older, was that something that meant increasingly more to you?
I would say that it meant less to me for a while. It meant less to me because then I became aware that there were lots of other cultures, there were lots of other interesting things. I was an exchange student to Japan when I was in high school, so that became interesting. My favorite subject, I'm a historian, and so I studied a lot about the world wars. And so for a while, I came to realize, well, we're not the only culture, you know, there's lots of other cultures, and I explored them all. But after my grandfather died, I know I had heard he grew up in an orphan. I know I must have. But after he died, and that I really became aware that that's why he and his brother John were so close. They were sent together at 5 and 4. And they lived away from their mother all those years, 10 years. And then I really became interested in their lives and their lives on the islands. And he always, my grandparents always referred to their home in the Azores as the old country, and or the Azilash. And I never really was much interested in the old country or the Azilash until I was an adult, and then it consumed me to know more.
What happened?
Part of it is I'm kind of the pack rat of the family, and so my grandparents died, and a lot of their belongings, people opened boxes and saw all these old pictures and letters in Portuguese from the Azores. And it was like, well, what do we do? So they packed him in the oldest son's house. And then the oldest son died, and they packed him. And eventually they ended up in my dad's house. And so when my dad died, and here were all of these boxes of things that everyone that could tell me what this was, they were gone. And I was just determined I was going to find out. And shortly before he died, he and I went to the Azores together. And he showed me the orphanage where his father had been raised. And once he was gone and not there to tell me anymore, I had to know. It consumed me to know. And so I began interviewing my cousins. My godparents were still alive and one aunt, and I bothered every cousin I had to say, you know, were you ever in the festa? Did you get to be the queen? And do you remember great-grandma? Because as she got very, very old and her husband died, my grandmother brought her own mother to the United States in 1957. And so my older cousins all knew her. I sat with my aunts and went through all of their pictures, and then I started scanning them and putting them on Facebook. And I had one Facebook friend from the Azores. And I would tag him and say, look at this picture. I don't know who, you know, this is the Azores, obviously. And pretty soon, people were commenting like, Joan, who is this girl that has these pictures? Because those are my grandparents, and they've been dead for 50 years. Or, I have never seen this picture of my madringa. Where did these come from? So then I started connecting with family. So now, that old box of pictures, nobody knew who they were. I can pull each one out and say, well, I know who this is, and this is, and this is. And I thought for Christmas one year, I would put together a little packet for my cousins with the pictures that I had, and it became this 365-page book of all those old photographs that I had found. And so now I have donated 600 photos to the Archives and Library on Treseda. My grandfather found success here, and he really did well for himself, so he sent family back there money for a camera. Because from the time of the revolution, about 1910, 1911, until the Carnation Revolution, people were poor, and there were not very many cameras available. Well, my grandpa had sent this camera, and these photos were sent over 40 years to California, and they were all saved in this box. And I appreciate them, and now that we can identify people my family appreciates them, but what's going to happen to a box of old pictures, you know? So I contacted the library in Angra, and they have accepted the photos. I sent them back to where they came from. And in June, we're having an opening reception for a gallery show of all these old pictures. They're preserving and studying them.
What an accomplishment.
I'm so excited about it. And I get to name, you know, they told me I could name it whatever I want. Well, I'm going to name it after my grandparents. I'm so proud of them.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm just delighted.
What a lovely
And I'm
story.
taking my adult son and his wife and my 3 grandchildren, because I don't want to miss the chance to take them to that place myself. And they already understand, you know, just the magic that I feel when I'm there. So we're super excited.
So have they been there before, your
No.
children? This will be a first time.
This will
for
be the
them.
first time.
So how important has it been to you, Kathy, that your children kind of grow up with that same sense of connection, that same sense of community that you
It was very easy for that to happen because I was raised in Riverdale. My children were raised in Riverdale on the same farm. We attended the same schools. We went to the same church. So them being in the celebration, you know, was every year, every summer, it was to see, you know, what they were going to be in the celebration. And I remember my son was the escort to the little queen, and you know, that was just a big deal to me. And but yeah, it was important to them. And to this day, I make better sopers than they make at the festas. And so every summer we have a Festa de Neil at our house on our friend Neil's birthday, and we make sopes, and we play Festa. You know, growing up, we played Festa all the time.
So what does that entail, playing?
Playing Festa. Somebody gets to be the queen, wear the crown, and have a cape, and we go to Mass, where we have communion, and then we parade down the street.
So is this all pretend? When you
It's
say
all
play?
pretend. But it was, you know, that was how we had fun, was play Festa. And my boys too grew up. Now, my grandchildren, their lives are completely different. Their parents are both educated. They're growing up in Fresno. They're attending Fresno schools. They do attend a Catholic church and catechism. But there isn't that sense of Portuguese community here in Fresno like we had in Riverdale. But my grandchildren have been in the Riverdale Portuguese celebration. So they have an idea, you know, what it is, and we talk to them about it.
How important is that to you?
It's very important. You know, I remember when I was raising my kids, you're so busy with the business of life and working and all those things. I remember my mother saying to my boys, your mom is responsible for where you're going. I'm responsible to make sure you know where you came from. And so my mom would tell them stories all the time about her childhood and then what she had learned about my dad's childhood. And so that's what I do with my grandchildren. Both of my parents are deceased, but I've taught them from the very beginning, you know. My granddaughter, my mother's maiden name was Morgan, and so my granddaughter's name is Morgan. And I always tell her, do you know what my mother's name was? And it's just important to me that they know that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the festas, because I'm imagining, you know, growing up in Riverdale as someone who's into genealogy and as a historian, you can kind of provide us with an overview in terms of how festas have changed. Have you noticed a lot of change over time?
I don't think so, because I have pictures of my dad's sisters, his sister Mary and his sister Alice. They were both queens of the Riverdale celebration in different years. It would have been in the late 1920s. And when I look at those photos, it looks so much like the photos that you see today, you know, girls dressed up very nice, families probably saving money for a long, long time so that their daughter could be the queen and participate in that and have that experience, and nice dresses and lots of pictures. And so I think because the nature of the festa is still the same, you know, I think they're very, very much the same. Not the same as they do them in the Azores, because in the Azores they do it in the evening when it's cool. Here in Fresno, you know, it's pretty hot to do a festa in the middle of the day. They need to, but I don't really think they've changed that much, and it's still so exciting. It's as exciting as, you know, everybody got a new dress, and new shoes.
What about it? If you could explain to someone who isn't Portuguese and hasn't grown up around festas, what is it that makes them so special?
Well, first of all, it's a celebration of the Holy Spirit. It's a religious celebration. It's not just the, you know, somebody gets to be queen. It's not just that. It's a religious celebration. And there is a mass, that's a central part. But it was a gathering place. You know, it's where we saw extended family members and Portuguese people from other communities that we, you know, if you were sweet on some Portuguese boy from another town, you would go to the festa. And, you know, have I done that? So it was just the biggest social event of the year. And the one in your own town was a big deal. And the other one that was always a big deal was the one in Pismo. Everybody went to the one in Pismo. But I'm learning more and more about them now, and now I really want to go to the one in Newman.
Why? What's Newman?
Newman has, you know, just the best festa. And it's huge, and it's very true to the foundation of the event, which was 100 years ago maybe, and they really stick to how they did it all those years ago. And they have a bullfight, which I don't want to see a bullfight, but you know, they just say if you're going to see a celebration, Newman is the one to see. So maybe next year.
So how many festas are there?
Quite a few. Now, outside of the Azores and a couple of places in Portugal, you'll only find Portuguese celebrations, you know, on the East Coast, like in Massachusetts area. I understand there might be a few in Idaho, a few in Hawaii, because a lot of immigrants ended up in Hawaii first, and then along Central California. And I'm very proud of the people of Azorean ancestry, that they have kept this tradition alive. But what happens, there's a regular calendar, and you have to get on the calendar, and every Sunday starting after Pentecost or Easter, there is at least one festa somewhere, and usually there's 2 or 3. And so all through the summer, there's a town that's having a Portuguese celebration, and you can go.
When you mention a calendar, Kathy, is it a centrally kept calendar by particular churches or dioceses, or is there like
I think
California?
it's a standardized calendar that has already existed for quite some time. And so the first celebration would be the first Sunday after, and I think it's after Easter. And so once you've established that that's your Sunday for your Portuguese celebration, then you're locked in. That's your Sunday. And then as more and more towns grew, if somebody might be having a celebration in Gustine or in Lodi, or, you know, so somebody down in the valley that didn't have the option to travel, or, you know, then they would have their little festa in Stratford on the same day. And so then you kind of pick and choose which festas you're going to go to. But the fact that the world is changing, you know, when my grandparents came here, they married other Portuguese people. And most of their children, except for my dad, married other Portuguese people. But then with my generation, I don't think any of us married Portuguese people. So our traditions begin to be diluted, because now you have a family and you're sharing different kinds of traditions. With this family that's, my husband's family is German, and so the fact that you can still drive into a town and see a Portuguese hall and see it so proudly maintained. In Riverdale, we have a Veterans Memorial Hall that belongs for all of us and honoring our veterans. And it's in terrible condition. They don't take care of it, even though it is a tax-funded district. But right next door on the other side of the church, which sits in the middle, is the Riverdale Portuguese Hall. And it's just beautiful. And so it just assures me that other people besides me still care, that we still have pride in our background, in our family history, and that lots of things might change, but as long as there are a few Portuguese people that want to get together and do the work, we're gonna take care of this place, and we're going to honor our ancestors and do this every year. And I'm very proud of them for doing it.
And raise children as you have, to continue to be invested and to recognize the value of that. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit, because you've mentioned a lot about the significance of the Queen. It sounds almost like it's better than being homecoming queen. Is that correct?
Not even close. Well, the festas are based on the fact that the King and Queen of Portugal, people were starving, people were hungry, and he forbade his wife, the Queen, to feed the poor people. And so she just couldn't bear that. And she would sneak loaves of bread under her gown and go out to feed the poor people. And she was on her way to do that. The legend is she was on her way to do that, and the king stopped her and demanded to see what she had in her coat. And the legend is that she knew she was going to open her coat and he would see the bread. And she opened her coat and it was all flowers. And, who knows what any of the facts were about that. But it's to remember that generous act of that queen, that she cared about her people and she wanted to feed her people, and that the Holy Spirit then gave her the avenue to do that by turning her loaves of bread into roses.
So what does it mean to a young Portuguese girl to then be chosen? And is there just one queen that can be chosen each year? Every year there's a junior queen and a senior queen. We always called them the little queen and the big queen. And usually it's someone from a Portuguese family who has parents that have served on the committee, because it's big work to put on an event like that, because you have to collect money and you have to take care of all these details. So, but I wouldn't know what it's like to be queen, because I never got to be queen. But my little sister got to be queen. And it was a very big deal. Every Sunday we were going to a different town to march in a different parade. And, just growing up Portuguese anyway, Saturday was always the day that we got our hair washed and curled for church on Sunday morning, and, got all dressed up for church. And we had to wear hats to church in those days and things like that. But yes, to be a queen was a very big deal. And even way back when my dad's sisters were queens in the 20s, I don't know how successful my grandfather was at the time, but it was the dress and the cape and the formal portraits, and that is a big expense. And so for a family to have their daughter be the queen, I think it is a big deal. I wouldn't know. I wasn't the queen, and I didn't have any daughters. But you played festa.
But I played festa.
And I bet you were a darn good queen.
Oh, and we would have to, if there were 5 of us, we had to play it 5 times, because everybody got to be the queen once.
So you mentioned going to the Azores. How many times have you been there?
I've been twice, And I've traveled with amazing people. I know Fred Machado was a member of this parish. The first time I went, Fred was on our trip. And the reason for the trip was that Fred Machado had immigrated to the United States and hadn't gone back to his island for years and years and years. And he became a successful dairyman, had a family, went back and saw their church was falling apart and buildings in their village were falling apart. So Fred took it upon himself that his personal sacrifice was going to be, he was going to save money and come back and help rebuild his village. And over the years, he went every year and had money for all these different projects. So the people in this village, on that trip, they had what we called a festa honoring Fred Machado. And one of the wonderful things about the Azores is, of course, they're secluded in the middle of nowhere, and the population of the islands is very small. And everything is a festival. They celebrate every saint's feast day, but everybody plays a musical instrument and sings, and everybody participates in Mass. And so we would go to this little town, and everybody in the town would come out and have a parade and play their musical instruments. And then we'd get to the church, and there'd be the choir at the church, and then we'd go across the street to the hall, and they were the people serving the food. And they just live that lifestyle. It's completely central to who they are. And I really was impressed with everything about the Azores.
Did you feel an immediate connection?
Absolutely. Okay, this is so corny, but there's a song John Denver sings, and the lyrics are, he was born in the summer of his 27th year, going home to a place he'd never been before, a Rocky Mountain high. Well, I wrote my own karaoke lyrics to that, and I sing it all the time. I was born in the summer of my 57th year, going home to that place I had never been. And I came home amazed at the magic of that place and those people, and that here we are so caught up in, getting that degree and getting this job and kids in violin and all of these things. And those things are important to them, but it's just a completely different kind of pace, and it's magical.
Sounds like it changed your life.
It changed my life profoundly. And like I said, I just feel like I had no idea what my purpose was. There were lots of things I'm interested in, history, poetry, all those things. But my purpose now is to tell everyone. You know that picture, those boxes of junk in Grandma's closet that nobody knows what to do with? Oh, they're so valuable, don't throw them out. Let's look through them, let's figure it out. Let's piece together, even though they might all be, let's piece it together, we can do that. And it's too important to not do. And, if someone had done this a few generations ago for me, I don't know if it would have impacted me, but I'm doing it now for those that come after my children and my grandchildren, so there's no question. And by then, there'll probably be a big melting pot of, because my son, who's, he's married to a part Italian woman, so the Portuguese in my grandchildren is minute, and yet they know they're Portuguese, and they know they're Italian, and they know they're English, but I'm going to make sure they know what it means to be Portuguese. The rest of it, it's on their other grandmas. This grandma's doing that.
So what does it mean to be Portuguese?
It means, I came from very brave people who, for generations, I have been able to go back and find baptism records in the 1500s. So for many generations, they lived that very simple life in the middle of the Atlantic. They only depended on themselves. Ships would come through and they might pick up this or that, you know, from somewhere else in the world. But they made their living from the sea and from the soil, and they were satisfied. And as the population grew, pretty soon there wasn't enough land for all of the children to have something, only the oldest child. The younger children had, many times their options were to enter the priesthood or become a nun, because if they didn't have some family property, you know, they really, unless they could marry someone who had family property. So to think that these people then heard about, there are opportunities in Hawaii. Even if you don't have money, we will pay your passage and you can work in a sugarcane field and then have your own piece of land, either here or you can go to Boston, and you can go to Providence, Rhode Island. And these most of them are not educated people, had probably never seen a map, and some of them said, you know what, that's the only way I can see a future for myself. And they did it. And you know how scary it must have been to get in a boat in those days? I mean, like when my grandfather came, World War I hadn't started. But by the time my grandmother came, the Titanic had sunk in the Atlantic, and German U-boats were all over in the Atlantic. How brave must you be, or how desperate for better opportunities to say, well, I'm going to go. And my grandparents had it much easier than many people because my grandfather could read and write so many languages. He was educated. Essentially, the orphanage gave him a college education. So he could read contracts. So he became the man in the community that people would come to and say, could you tell me what this means, what this says? So he was able to help a lot of people. Also, I'm proud of him because once he got here and he made a life for himself and was established, and he worked for another man and milked another man's cows, and then, you know, bought his own little piece of property and still milked that man's cows, but started buying his own one or two cows, and pretty soon, when he got established, he would do the same for the others who were coming. And when I was growing up, there had been a big earthquake, and so the government was allowing a lot of people to come from the Azores, and my grandfather was bringing people, and he brought so many into Fresno County, the government said, okay, you can't bring any more Azoreans into Fresno County. Well, Riverdale is on the county line, so if you stand on this side of the street, you're in Fresno County. So Grandpa built a house on that side of the street, we're in Kings County, and he started bringing more people. And he helped all those people, and you know, in the 60s, when I was growing up, all of the milkers were Portuguese-speaking Azorean immigrants. But you know what? They, like the others before them, encouraged their children to get educations, reminded them, you're going to milk cows 7 days a week. You don't get a weekend off to go to Pismo, you know. So get your education.
So it sounds like you associate then being Portuguese with being courageous and bold
and hard worker.
Yeah.
My grandfather said a summer in the San Joaquin Valley is worse than hell. And it's hard on the burros and the men, because it would be 117 degrees in Stratford in the summer. And that was before you could go in to the house at lunchtime and sit under the air conditioner, you know. They were hardworking. And they did that for me. I didn't exist, but they knew they wanted their children to have better. And yet, when I think about life in the Azores as I have seen it, life there seems so much more precious because they enjoy music. They enjoy socializing and festivities. Here it seems more about, working and our responsibilities and things like that. So I'm just thankful they made the choice and they came here and they gave me all of this opportunity.
So how do you think that being Azorean American has shaped who you are as a person?
I learned so much from my dad and my grandparents about hospitality, about lending a helping hand. And in today's world, I hear so many people that I care about saying things like they want, we've got to lock our borders I'm thankful that I was raised with the understanding that everyone deserves a chance and no one is better or worse. And okay, this person might have just come here. They might not really understand English. They might be a little bit backwards yet, but these are good people. They're here they want to work. And my Azorean background with my grandfather and my grandmother and my dad really did teach me what I feel are my best qualities, and that's compassion, acceptance, understanding humanity, and that the world is a big, big place with lots of different people. We don't have to agree on everything, but I'm going to give you my friendship and offer it freely and not expect anything in return, and also my faith. I'm in this day and age, a lot of people won't say, I'm asking God to bless you, I'm praying for you, and I'm keeping you in my prayers. But it's such a big part of my life because I grew with my grandma putting her hand on my head and giving me a blessing. And I feel nothing sets me apart in my life that I've ever done. Not who I married, the career I chose, the house I live in, the car I drive, none of that matters. But what matters to me is how I treat other people and how I share my faith. And that's what matters.
Is there anything I didn't ask that you would like to share?
I'm going to the Azores again in June, and I can't wait. And we were scheduled to go last year, but because of the pandemic, we couldn't go. But what I do want people to know is it's not hard. Everybody has a story that is amazing and fascinating. And, if it's your life, you might not think but it's fascinating. Your journey, and it deserves to be told. And I'm so thankful for the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute for getting people to tell their stories. And if anybody needs help doing that, I can help them and if I can do it, anybody can do it.